Yeah, welcome everybody. Lunch was served, and hopefully you had a coffee after that. Welcome back. I would say this Singapore Maritime Week is blowing minds. I would say 20,000 people and a bus everywhere. Most of the things oversubscribed. Not even talking about the cocktails that's going to follow. So wonderful to be here. And thanks a lot, MPA and Informa, to invite us for a subject that's a bit different and a little bit out of normal scope, but maybe that makes it even more interesting because we should look beyond the normal limits and see how will our world finally change. You see Nova Maxis, it's something very new, a new kid on the block if you like. I thought after so many years was time to step out of the corporate world, and Nova Maxis facilitates and it connects people and ideas to create sustainable and commercially viable services in our industry. And I'm trying to analyze mature concepts and startup proposition to merge and integrate and fit them together in order to create true value and ship and shore. I've been in Asia for 34 years, came from trading, manufacturing and sales, and then my trip to maritime started with 8 years being a ship chandler, which is partly also covered here. And then I continued for 10 years heading global procurement, purchasing and logistics for 3 leading ship management companies. And my mantra was always standardize, integrate systems and work towards a sustainable future, which is sounding very easy, but not totally without challenges. I wanted always to empower vessels and have internal and third-party clients on board by creating transparent platforms to work more efficiently and improve OPEX and have better spend for everyone. Now, I have a very interesting panel here today, but I want to set the scene first a little bit. We have to reimagine the supply chain for a complex, interdependent world. And we have to basically be clear that we are fraction only of the holistic supply chain in shipping. And even that is also constantly changing and evolving. At the same time, we came out of a very special situation, which was a combination of horrible COVID and disruptions related to events in China and Russia and so on, where we basically have to get up and say to ourselves, never let a good crisis go to waste, and what are our learnings from this as well, and how do the new concepts help us to go through this. When we look at new services and how we want to shape our future, and a little bit from the angle of a user, I've always been on the ship management side, owners have the same drivers. Basically what motivates ship managers and owners is 4 very simple things. It's either safety, it's efficiency, it's decarbonization, or today called also ESG, and 4th, making money. So these are the 4 things. So when we look at new services, we have to tick one of those 4 boxes minimum. Otherwise, we have to go home and redraw. So that's an interesting thing, I think, to remember before we dive into our discussion later on. Also, we are in Singapore, and I think it's not exaggerated to say that Singapore is the perfect launch pad for any kind of new ideas, or supposed to be, at least. And I think it's probably also the only place where the government is so totally supportive of grooming new ideas and not destroying them by regulations or other nonsensical issues. So we are eternally thankful, I would say, to be here and to be allowed to play. Because who doesn't play, we know it from our kids, doesn't learn. We fall, we pick up again. Now, it is also a strange industry that we're in. Just maybe one thing that not everybody is aware, we are all driven by safety, and we come back to that a little bit later as well. Please do remember that safety on board is 20 times worse than in an onshore job. and it's still 5 times more dangerous than a construction job. So basically, whatever we do, we have to be guided by that principle and be fully aware that our colleagues on board with whatever things we put into place, we have to take care of them. There's a lot of trends that are coming in. They're mostly linked to buzzwords that are very hard to fathom, and maybe all of us have heard enough of them. It starts with blockchain. Even decarbonization gets a tiring factor these days, but I think our job here is to keep it relevant, on the ground, operational, and kind of convert buzzwords into actionable items, so that we really know and understand what does it cost, what does it get us for that, what do we need to bring to the table, and who are the stakeholders. And end of the day, what is the matching problem statement? It has to solve a problem, otherwise it's also not good enough. Okay, so when we look at the trends that we have in shipping, and also post-crisis, I would say. So let me just throw out a few words that we will revisit later. It's multi-sourcing, it is transparency and visibility, it's regionalization, sustainability, and resilience. That one not to underestimate. And resilience, it's including to all kinds of attacks, including cyber attacks. So the question, which we will answer later on, how do 3D printing, drone services, and and forward-thinking last mile services fit into this whole picture? We want to cover 3 focus areas with this esteemed panel here. So the first one is the technology readiness level. We want to dive into this. The second one is the viability of the commercial model. For me, hugely important. It's nice to dream, but it's better to realize. And the third one, and probably the most difficult one, where I want your candid comments, please. We're amongst us, almost nobody listening. It's the adoption barriers, because that is something where we can improve quickly, I think. Yeah. We are living in interesting times. We are coming towards Industry 5.0. It's identified as the hyper-customization time. And I think the services that you guys are trying to tailor go into this direction. We keep in mind that shipping as an industry is not extremely aggressive in wanting to change. I was asked a few times the last couple of days, how does ChatGPT implement the loss of jobs in shipping? I said, not at all, because everything comes 5 years later. So in that sense, I hope that with our stimulus discussion, we make people understand that yet there's a lot of technology that's being applied, and that shipping can move fast if we all work together. All right. One of the reasons why I'm here is I was a ship chandler, then I was buying things, but also I was for both drones and the 3D printing side, probably one of the first movers signed up for the services when they started a couple of years ago. And today we're sitting here and we're reviewing together. It's an interesting review. I don't want to be too harsh, because I don't feel that we're at the end of the journey. We're in the middle of the journey. Yeah? And maybe today will help us to define what do we have to do to complete that journey and then make it a true success. Now, if you ask me for my perfect Kodak moment, then looking at this panel composition here as a client, when I was a ship manager until 3 weeks ago, there is a ship chandler with his electric truck that brings a 3D printed spare part into the port to the vessel. Into the port. And he also brings along cash to master. And the third thing is that he has fresh donors for the crew. And all that will be then transported via a drone to a tanker on anchorage. So let us live with this picture in our mind and then try to think, is this a dream? Is it already reality? Is it a proof of concept reality, or can it be part of our daily supply chain? And with that, before we answer this question, maybe a very quick round of introduction for yourselves. And may I ask you to add an answer to the question is, when you get up in the morning, what's driving you? Which thought is grappling you to go through the day? Any, please.
Yeah, Peter, thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for the invitation to be on this panel. Also, congrats, Peter, for starting Novamaxis. I'm sure you're going to make an incredible impact in the industry. So a little bit about myself. I'm apart from the president of the Singapore Association of Ship Suppliers and Services, which is the voice of the industry in Singapore, and we do have regular conversations with Maritime Port Authority of Singapore and the Enterprise Singapore, to see how we can, upskill, upgrade, and also transform the industry. So that's what the association does. And myself, I have been a ship supplier for close to 40 years. So not only knowing about concepts, but the practical aspect of it as well. So I hope that through this panel, we can share some insights and how we can look at improving the industry as a whole. Thank you very much.
Dr.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So my name is Chaw Sing, and I run the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Cluster. This is actually a national platform that was created in 2015 to focus on translational research to drive adoption of additive manufacturing into our industries. Under the Manufacturing 2030 vision, which some of you may have read about in Singapore, we actually aspire to grow the manufacturing value add by 50% by 2030. And one of the key foundational pillars of that is to help our companies and industries move into more advanced manufacturing technologies, of which additive manufacturing is one of them, right? The other two technology domains that are, I would say, underpin the cornerstone of this aspiration is probably robotics, automation, and of course, artificial intelligence. My background is actually pretty diverse. I was actually from the semiconductor foundry industry many years ago. That was where I started, and I was in HP running manufacturing supply chain operations. I think to the question what Peter was asking about, what drives me every day, I think there is a fundamental belief that we need to work together to solve a lot of the existential crisis issues that is now facing the planet today. And I think a lot of it, we will talk through that in a moment.
Danny, did you mention your driver, or did I just miss it?
No, I didn't mention. So what drives me every day is waking up and seeing how, because we're living in this technological age, and I think as ship suppliers we do lack a little bit in terms of adopting technology, and that's where I get up every day and looking at how the industry can transform and how we can put things together so that it can be adopted, so that we can remain relevant and sustainable.
Thank you. Hakon, if we will.
Yeah, my name is Håkon Lillekjær, and I'm heading up additive manufacturing in Wilhelmsen. Feel very lucky to have this role, and it's been a very exciting journey for Wilhelmsen since we started this in 2016. The aim of what we're doing is to enable a digital supply chain for spare parts, addressing some of the bigger supply chain issues that exist in today's market. That is long lead time, poor part performance, and obsolescence, causing operational issues and additional cost for vessel owner operators, but also other industries such as oil and gas, mining, etc. So here me on stage, I brought a small component. It's for a Danish pump OEM. This part, they have a supply deficit of 5,000 pieces, not able to manufacture enough parts. And by doing this on demand using advanced digital manufacturing technologies such as 3D printing, you're able to address issues like this. And what wakes me up in the morning is to be able to go on this journey together with my team, together with my customers, together with my partners, that we're collectively working together to make this change.
Thank you so much. Sanjay.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for having me on this panel. It's nice to be here. I know I'm here meeting you all after lunch, so please bear with us and the rest of the panel. My name is Sanjay. I'm from Skyports. I lead the business in Asia Pacific for Skyports Drone Services. We are headquartered in the UK, and I run the Asia Pacific business, growing out the operations here. Now, what we do in Skyport's drone services is, as the name says, we provide services to our customers using drones. If I were to use a short phrase, we are like an airline for using drones as a tool to serve our customers. We don't build the drones, we find the best-in-class systems to get the job done. We actually started working on this for parcel deliveries and medical deliveries long range in the UK and Europe. And I found a real use case here in the maritime space where we could do something different with the type of aircraft we have. So we've done operations, over ranges of 80 kilometers out in heavy wind conditions, in rain, which Peter, I think we'll talk about later. We've also now just recently onboarded a 600 kilogram aircraft that carries 200 kilos in cargo with about 400 kilometers in range. So we're pushing the boundaries here. My background, I've been in the military in Singapore for over 15 years before I came out to the commercial sector. I've been operating drones for a long time now. And what wakes me up every morning is, having seen how drones operate in the military for the services that's done there, how drones can actually do good for society. That's what I want to have and bring about here.
And every time when I run around McRitchie, then I'm thinking of you because that drone is flying on my head and looking at what I'm doing.
That's right, that's right. That is another project that our team does 24/7 in Singapore.
Okay, may I start with Dr. Ho? Because I think we should start with the big picture, and I call you the crystal ball man. When you look at the wider area of 3D printing, we will talk about where we stand today, but maybe you can give us a 3 to 5 year outlook. Maybe that's a fair timeline to look at.
Yeah, so I guess for additive manufacturing, I think this has been going on for, I would say, 30 years, right? But it's only in the last 10, 12 years, I would say, there's a lot of concerted focus across the ecosystem to drive the technology, right, to the stage where you can actually manufacture real products, right, very complex systems. So if you look at the market sort of perspective, which always is a very good way to give you the big picture, the global manufacturing output is probably somewhere in the ballpark of 14 trillion. And based on the latest report that we know from Wallace, the market for global additive manufacturing industry is probably somewhere in the ballpark of like close to 20 billion now. And it's been on this exponential trajectory in the last 10 years since we started, tracking. Wallace's report is actually a very good reference because actually aggregation of all the inputs from country representatives, of which actually Singapore contributed to that report as well. So what it tells you is that, and that's 20 billion is actually less than 1% of the manufacturing output. So what it tells you is that there is still a very, very big opportunity. So I'm more of a half glass empty person. If you look at it, there is huge, tremendous whether market opportunity and value capture that we can go after. If you go by industry vertical, of course today's event is on maritime, but if you just scan across the aerospace MRO or biomedical or even in the construction sector, there's huge innovation actually that's happening, right? A lot of new companies are coming on board. For example, comes to mind like Mighty Buildings in the US. They have already started a business in using additive manufacturing technologies to create homes, right, for residential purposes. And then if you look at the biomedical space, there's huge traction now going into implantable products like cranioplasty application, maxillofacial. And these are value added to the clinical community because it has this personalized ability. I mean, you can customize the design that it fits the anatomy of the individual patient, so that enhances the patient outcomes and reduces costs. Of course, back to today's so the main topic about maritime. I think this was one of the sectors that NAMIC, when we started 2015, we started actually looking at this space because of the belief that irrespective of what happens, the maritime sector will continue to be extremely relevant. And we believe that the industry as a whole, there is still inefficiencies, right, in various parts of the value chain. And for us, I think because AM itself is a fabrication technology, and if you further kind of dig deep into it, there's that design freedom that allows you to lightweight the design. You can part consolidate. You can create the parts on demand. Those kind of advantages, thus, in some ways, if you put everything together, gives tremendous value proposition, right, to stakeholders in this sector. So this is something that we've been trying to focus on in the last few years.
Thank you, Doctor. That's very interesting. Hakan, over to you. And if you could help us to remember how these first initial ideas came about in, for 3D printing in our industry. And so very often, Light Blue started with it. So can you give us a little bit of a sentimental journey?
I think that's correct. I think Maersk was one of the companies who started exploring 3D printing. More on the polymer side, the typical printers you see people having at home, printing simpler polymer parts, and they place some printers, to my understanding at least, on board some vessels. And they announced that, and after that we didn't hear anything. So I think it's safe to assume that it was not successful. But since then it has developed a lot. I think most of us, or most of people who doesn't understand or know too much about 3D printing, thinks that it's all about polymer printing, simple parts, doorknobs and hooks and things like that. But it's actually quite much more advanced. You can print parts that are up to 10 times 5 times 2 meters. We're using 7 different technologies. You can print propellers, propeller blades to complex parts, both in polymer, metal, and composite materials. So there's a huge opportunity space that many of us are not aware of. And that opens up many, many opportunities. And what's important in order to succeed with additive manufacturing, which is the industrial term for 3D printing, is that it requires an ecosystem approach. It's not sufficient that one end user is saying that we want to adopt 3D printing. Because if it's only the end user doing it, you will only be limited to the parts on board the vessel where there are low or no IP rights. But if you really want to make this happen, you need to get the equipment manufacturers on board. It's like listening to Spotify with one song. You will never buy that subscription to Spotify. The only reason why people are paying for Spotify is you have wide access to many art songs. And it's similar with 3D printing. My mic is going off. You need pump makers, engine makers, crane OEMs, gear makers, etc. Only then it will be an interesting option for the end users.
Okay, let's clarify for some of the people in the audience that didn't quite get the difference. Maersk tried to print on the vessels.
Yes.
And they found out that handling 70 to 80 raw materials was more difficult than ordering parts. So you have basically taken the position that a port-based or key port-based printing station minimizes the CO2 and logistic impact, right?
And it doesn't have to be port-based, it can be in-country. It's about reducing lead times from 6 months to days. Of course, in the future, we would like to see port-based printing, so it's even closer, so you can get down to days and hours.
Yep.
And so what we decided to do is that in order to fast-track development, we have onboarded network of production partners producing on our behalf. And I think that's interesting because these are production companies that don't only serve our customers, the maritime and offshore space, but they serve other industries. They serve rail or mining, etc.
Okay, the key question for us is here, how do we move from a model example or proof of concept into mainstream supply chain? So how do the people on board and in the purchasing departments associate a problem or inquiry that they see with the potential for 3D printing? Because, okay, I've handled more than 50 purchases and I've tried to explain to them so many times. The use cases in the past were quite limited. Also when you look at the cost competitiveness, right? So it was very clearly the case for obsolete parts, where you can't get them otherwise, then you print them no matter what the price is. It is if you only replace a part of something more complex or expensive, otherwise you would have the resupply cost, right? Or I told them whatever has a longer lead time than 3 months, we should consider printing because also their pricing is no longer interested. You mentioned as a game changer OEM listings and printings. Will that open you the doors for mainstream sourcing activities?
I think the challenge you always have when introducing new technology, or it can be mature technology, but to a new industry like maritime, the challenge is often the mindset shift. And let's say you have a procurement department who wants to procure a part. The lead time today is 6 months, and they say, "Can you do this part?" And we say, "Yes, we can do it in 2 weeks." But the price is, let's say, twice the price or 3 times the price. Well, now it's too expensive. But then you can ask the question back, what's the additional cost for the vessel to wait for the part? Will there be any operational issues? It's important to look at this from a total cost of ownership perspective. If you can wait 6 months to get the part, it will most likely be cheaper. But for instance, last week we had a vessel outside Korea that was detained by port authorities because they were missing a simple polymer part to an engine on board a rescue boat. And that's a very good example where then, getting that and going on board, scanning that part and printing that part locally in Korea and getting that vessel to sail is of huge value for the customer. But once again, the OEMs are important because then you move into the critical space. And if you don't get the OEMs on board, the criticality of the parts are often lower. But if you get the OEMs on board, the number of critical parts will increase, and hence also it's more valuable for the end users.
Thank you. Danny, before we come to you, let's move into the drone space a little bit, Sanjay. And Sanjay, do you suffer from this old startup dilemma that worst timing projections need to be tripled? As a passionate builder of a business, you can't imagine all the obstacles that you have. What basically makes it take so long?
Well, I think, Peter, to be honest, when you're looking at drones, and we're now looking at drones in a maritime space, which is a very traditional environment, right, where we are here to come in and say, look, here is an innovative new way that you can do things differently, be more efficient, and improve or reduce the risks that's put out to crew. So there is the challenge of, one, convincing people to consider taking this up as an opportunity, so that takes time. There is the challenge of course, convincing the authorities as well that this is a safe means to be brought abroad. And this is something around the world, not a lot of authorities are even open or willing to look into this. And then the third part is the technology itself. We are, like I mentioned, an airline. We have to look at the OEMs that actually need to build out the technology capable enough to be delivering to ships, right? Reduce the risks, mitigate the risks, and be able to get the job done.
Thanks. And I also have to say, with a waiver, that today we talk more about the land-to-ship deliveries. There's umpteen use cases for drones today and for the future, right? The most, for me as a safety-obsessed person, the most relevant is enclosed spaces where we are sending people into tanks to do things and verify. So that is, there we can save lives straight away. But it's also things like, we said, observation drones. They can look at so many things, also help us optimize port calls. You can look at truck positioning, ship positioning. You can look at the loading status of raw materials. You can even go so far as to, you can verify with a drone a bulk loading process into a bulk carrier, and if bags with unknown content are part of the loading process, a drone can pick it out and increase safety. So we don't want to cover this system of the future, but it's hugely interesting to just mention it. We're just beginning to understand what are the use cases for drones. However, if you look at last mile things, then we also have to consider the sustainability issues. And based on the old rule, do good things and talk about them, of course, drone operations compared to a diesel-powered barge, and that is not only from a cost advantage different, but also it's electric. Can you quantify what the client's advantage is? Is there anything that he can write rightfully into his ESG report, that he changes the way how he operates by applying this? And this is again back to a Singapore subject. Singapore will be the first place port in the world that by 2030 will have all the barges electrified. By that time, maybe that advantage will be fading away. But today, I think, can you quantify things in terms of CO2 reduction and measurement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, compared to the traditional launch boats that go out, we are looking at about 70 to 80% reduction because the drones are fully electric. And with that fully electric systems, bear in mind, what we're targeting here are essential supplies. Urgent on-demand stuff, even like what Hakon mentioned about 3D printed parts that urgently needs to be taken out, rather than wait for a launch or getting a launch to just carry that one small item. You get a drone to do that job, and you save on the carbon emissions that's going to be taken out from there. So that is the value that we're bringing out today. In a couple of years' time, when you have a full fleet of electrified launch boats, we're looking at continuing to provide this on-demand service, and this on-demand service will be for a variety of other types of cargo as well, increased in the cargo capacity as well.
Yeah, same as we had restrictions for viable business cases today. Also there, I think we can list a few. I think what really makes sense is delivery of 3D printed parts or urgent spare parts in general. We have medical supplies, we have documents, of course, and a new extension is cash to master, where you have found insurance coverage, right? We have challenges with tankers, I would say. Maybe you can talk about your Korean experience.
Absolutely. So yes, one of the latest things, apart from the spare parts and the documents that we've introduced, and we've trialed this over the past 2 months, is actually carrying cash for the shipmasters. Now, in order to be able to do this, we have to ensure that's a secure end-to-end process. Our insurers also demand of it, and that's essentially what we demonstrated with our partner companies in Singapore. So with this, the challenge, as Peter mentioned, is we do need to also deliver to tankers. There is, of course, added risk for drones landing on tankers. And this is where, over the last year, what we had done is we've also expanded operations to Korea. And in Korea, we were given permissions by the authorities to actually carry out flights. So we operate with a winch in Korea, and today we are running operations commercially, day and night, to tankers, container vessels, bulk carriers, and cargo ships out in Korea. And this is something that I'm hoping to bring out to Singapore back.
Maybe that's also an encouragement to our friends from the Singapore authorities to make sure that we contain this positive trial environment for this place and make sure that we can really run trials, but more importantly, regular operations later on. Because for me as a former client, it was just important that I can count on this. Yeah, if I tell you, is that vessels, please bring the things there that I know you are going, no matter what the weather is, and no matter what other activities are there, or whether it's national holiday, or I do not want to care, and I do not need or want to have a barge on standby. That is not efficient, right?
If I may, Peter,
Yes,
I just
sure.
wanted to, a little bit anchor on what Hakon was saying just now. I think one of the points about the value proposition of additive manufacturing is the fact that this is fundamentally a digital technology. So when people think about additive, they think about the printing, but it's more than that. It's about the design that you add value in terms of lightweighting the products. The other point is fundamentally it changes also the paradigm of how in traditional supply chain works, right? So most companies would typically centralize production at the lowest cost country possible, and they build incredible amounts of physical inventory because the business depends on it not to have a stock out situation. But for this case, what we are seeing is for this new future that we want to go into where you want to have more sustainability, you don't want to have waste. I think this concept, moving from physical to digital inventory, is something, it's very compelling. And this is not just for the maritime space, but we're hearing the same sort of feedbacks from the aerospace industry and many, many others. So I just wanted to just emphasize a little bit on that.
Thanks for that. And there's a lot of opportunities. The regionalization is also a product of the crisis that we went through. However, you mentioned the aerospace industry. They even managed to, among the major clients, to have pooling of spare parts and things like that. So these are things where we have we're just starting to think about it. But thank you for looking into that part of the future. Hakon, before I go to Danny, you want to say?
No, I think I just wanted to jump on that one. I think to share in the oil and gas industry, and the Norwegian oil and gas majors are typically saying that 80% of the spare parts they have on board a platform is never used. But that's because the cost of downtime is so high, so it's cheaper for them to invest into that inventory instead of reducing that working capital, which is not good for the wallet and it's not good for the environment. Hence, it's a lot of opportunities that lies into this transition.
Very good use case, thank you. Yeah, Danny, you're not an odd one out here. You represent an industry. If I look at drones and 3D printing, it's exciting. It's technology of today and the future. And I think you mentioned earlier on that you're trying to reinvent what you do and what your value creation is. The shipping clients, the managers and owners have always relied on the ship supply to solve problems that were self-created. We are or we were not able to plan properly. So looking back at my procurement days, we analyzed that still 40% of the requisitions have less than 72 hours of lead time. So which means somebody has to either print it or keep stocks for us, whether this is food or technical supplies or wherever. However, looking at the way how things are going, centralized port services, even warehouses, in order to optimize movements in and out, not waste truck time, really find the match between very quick loading and no loss of time. And the realization that the future of the ship supplier is basically in providing smart logistic services integrated into this system. Why do most of the ship suppliers do not realize this as a business opportunity or one of the very few means for survival? As companies get better in planning, as ecosystems open up to direct from the source supplies to the ship, why is the industry so fragmented in a sense that you can't even establish a fair price for these services, which I think is one of the reasons. From a user point of view, there's this buzzword again, last mile, and everybody thinks different things about it, but for me it's always very simple. The best way to get things to a vessel is through a chandler. You have boots on the ground, you have people who speak a language that everybody understands, they can handle documents, and they know about safety. So you have goods to transport on board and we can latch onto it. So that is perfect. The second best is to go through a forwarder in the port with boots on the ground again. And the worst solution is to go through an agent, because I have agency fees and I work with contracts that I do not know. The costs are very high. So in principle, you'd be very much set up to be part of that future scenario, but I see a reluctance to cooperate.
Well, Peter, I think that's a great question. So I think as a ship supplier, so traditional ship suppliers is basically a trader, right? An aggregator and a consolidator. So the traditional ship supplier would buy and sell with a margin in between and then complete the last mile. But over the years, the industry has become, as you say, it's a very fragmented industry, from the ship owners even to the suppliers. Therefore, everybody has got their own little niche, so to speak, in terms of handling individual customers. We have now been not only a ship supplier but also a forwarder. So ship owners now consolidate their third-party spares, what they buy direct from manufacturers, also now with us to make the last mile delivery because they want to save money. So talking about drone versus boats is always again about cost, right? So in Singapore it's a bit unique because in Singapore the ship suppliers are also very fragmented in terms of working together. That's where my role is trying to unite the ship suppliers industry so that we can then, we can then work at adopting certain technologies so that we can be more efficient. But it's an uphill task because a lot of them come back and say that actually my customers don't require me to do that, right? So why do I need to spend money? And then adopting technology means a big shift in terms of skill sets, right? And then a lot of them will come and tell us that, my people have been working with us. I don't have the time to train. I don't have the time to adopt new technologies. The costs are high. Even, the Singapore government has been very supportive in terms of adopting digitalization. Yet, the take-up rate is pretty low. Of course, during COVID, when 2020 came around, adoption rate actually sped up. A lot of people adopted technology because they had to. So now that the economies are opening up, I do hope that people don't let up in terms of adoption of technology. But I hear with great interest with additive manufacturing. But again, I think there's no economies of scale right now. So I'm just thinking just now, can additive manufacturing become addictive manufacturing, where everybody is like, wow, this is really something that we can do? Because I think in terms of the land scarce Singapore, right, everybody is, like for myself or my competitors, they operate large warehouses. They keep inventory because they need to fulfill last minute requirements. 40%, you said, is always last minute. And if we need to depend on our sub-suppliers, we may not make it in time. So everybody keeps inventory, but can then additive manufacturing change the way we operate? Can it be with economies of scale that we can then have prices that are competitive? But then can the role of a ship supplier from becoming a aggregator, then can we then invest? What's the cost benefit in terms of investing in all this equipment versus having the inventory? But I think Hakon did say that it's more expensive to have it printed than to have it in stock.
In most cases, it's
Right.
From a part-to-part basis.
Right.
If I can add quickly to your open question, additive manufacturing will not replace the existing traditional supply chain. That will continue and for decades, which is excellent. The Henry Ford model, mass production still works, able to get output with low prices, etc. That will remain. But it's a great technology, sorry my English, when shit hits the fan. When you cannot get the part in time, or the part is no longer delivered or supported by the OEM, etc. So it's a great alternative, not replacing, but it works hand in hand, and that's important.
Thank you, Hakan. And maybe adding to you, Danny, since we're talking the concept of Singapore, just please make sure and explain to your community that use the government facilities and collaborate very closely. I know you do, and you reach out to Jurong Port, you reach out to MPA, but I think the level of cooperation should be increased. Good example is SG TradeX, I would say, where in a very remarkable effort, the government is pushing all the stakeholders not only to shift data, but also to share smart operations. But it requires everyone to open up first and not doubt, and really do a jump into cold water. So I can only encourage that.
If I can just add on to what you said about SG TradeX, I think SAS is definitely very supportive. In fact, we signed an MOU with SG TradeX a couple of months ago. The earlier panel, the moderator did say that data is the fuel, right? It's the oil that moves things along, and data seems to be a sensitive topic because when SG TradeX requires data from the users to be able to build data and that they can do analysis. So when participants are asked to release their data, a lot of them actually take a step back and says, no, I'm not going to give you the data. Without that data, then things cannot progress. Same like ship owners, not only ship suppliers as well.
For this one, I think we need credible, neutral organizations that give us the confidence to collaborate, right? So maybe that is something that we can look at. We have about 10 minutes left, and I see on my little digital device here that we have a lot of questions, and if you don't mind, I would jump into some of them. First one is drones again, because we haven't heard much of you last few minutes. Is technology of supply by drone absolutely safe of risk of being hijacked, especially cache to master?
I like that question. It's one that I always get. Well, when we talk about safety, there is some level of risk mitigation that needs to be there. Is the system safe in terms of preventing it from, somebody from spoofing the drone and taking control of it? Yes, there are standards in place that, as per any digital system, you need to make sure that you cannot penetrate that. And the systems we operate go through that vulnerability penetration as well. So in terms of cache to the master, just to let you know as well, the cargo bay of the drone is locked and can only be operated by the pilot. And that gives an added level of security where if, for example, somebody else on board the vessel is trying to pry open and take the money, that's not possible. Unless the authorized person provides that necessary PIN code, that cargo bay will not be opened.
Thank you. Since you answered so well, next question also to you. Drones in Singapore do not fit. Reason is anonymous, by the way. Reason being we have limited land and airspace. How then can we use drones safely in the maritime in Singapore?
This is one thing I must say that I'm very thankful to the authorities, MPA, the RSAF, and CAS for helping out this. And to share, a year and a half ago when we started, we had a little smidget of an airspace that we could run trials, about 3 kilometers. Today, we are covering everything out of East Coast Park all the way down to the western side, western area past Sentosa. And we are operating in that wider area there. What the value that drones provide is it takes a launch boat about 45 minutes to an hour to get to a location out on the furthest ends of the port limits. The drone takes about 10 minutes. That is the time savings that you have. And when you want to look at medical products, urgent deliveries, you want to get out of the anchorage as quickly as you can, the drone provides that added layer that complements the traditional way of operating. That is what we're providing here in Singapore.
Thank you. Dr. Ho, digital supply chain enabled by additive manufacturing seems very vulnerable to pirating and cyber attacks. How can we safeguard ourselves against them?
Well, I would say anything that exists in the cyber world is prone to attacks, and no difference in this case where potentially some of these digital files are of value, right? And in some cases even for, not just for stealing, but, just for sabotaging, right, the designs. So I think the truth is that the technology foundation is there for us to create a very secure workflow. Some of the sandboxes that we have been piloting for a while basically involves creating this closed ecosystem of value chain partners, including the OEM, which owns the design, to the fabrication service providers, and then of course the class societies, right, which does the certification. So you can create these kind of closed ecosystem where you can actually make only members, right, members that are accessible to be able to access this platform. I think a lot of the companies, global conglomerates, and not to name names, but a lot of them are already starting to think along this mode of this what we call a closed ecosystem, where they can control the members, right, to be part of this. So that's one way. But I would say if you're talking about general industry needs, let's say you need a part that you obviously need it urgently, and you want to have a service bureau to support that. I think that kind of thing, it's already in some ways quite scaled up in terms of what's in the current market today. So we do have a lot of service bureau producing parts on demand for general industry use. And I think in the maritime space, we didn't talk much about. We talked a lot about ships, but if you look at the shipyards, they have the same challenge, right? How do you transform the traditional operations of casting and welding, which in Singapore's context, there's no longer any workers for this kind of industry. So you have to automate the entire process workflow, and additive manufacturing and is part of that transformation. So.
Thank you, Hakon. Maybe for you. Sorry. Do we need more standards developed, and how should class societies come into support?
Good question, very relevant question. So that's why we're also working very closely with class. Many of the class societies are now developing standards. Several standards have been developed. Of course, it depends on the certain technologies. So from our point of view, we have a quality management system that is been developed together with DNV, making sure that we are complying to the necessary standard. If the parts require a 3.2, 3.1 certificate, it will get a 3.2 or 3.1 certificate. So from an end user perspective, it really shouldn't matter if the part is conventionally manufactured or 3D printed, because it's adhering to the same standards. But of course, within completely new technologies, so for instance, within robotic welding, which is a robotic arm with a weld, that is connected to the welding requirements, although it's a 3D printing technology, but it's then connected to the traditional standards. When it comes to powder-based metal printing, there are new standards being developed, and standards have also been released by DNV on the area.
Okay, thank you. Maybe also for you, AM is marketed as high potential for marine space, but its adoption is below expectations. What are the current gaps that need to be addressed?
Very relevant question. I think this is the challenge all technology companies have in the maritime area. So the biggest challenge we have is to really get the adoption at the OEM side. We've been lucky to onboard a lot of OEMs to our offering. Many of them are still in pilot phase. So how do you bring them from pilot phase to full-scale implementation that actually an OEM, an engine OEM, propulsion OEM can offer hundreds of parts in a digital catalog that the end users can offer on demand? Only then you will see the larger adoption rates when it comes to AM.
Okay, mindful of time, I would like to give all of you the chance for closing remarks, but with a little bit of a twist. If you had a magic wand, and with reference to your industry and your challenges, and you had one wish free, what would you do with it, Danny?
If I had a magic wand and could progress things along, I would want to have a collaborative competitiveness within the industry. So as much as we are competitors in the industry, but we collaborate on certain aspects of the business so that we can be more effective, and then we can all become more relevant and more sustainable.
Thank you, Dr. Ho.
Yeah, my honest answer was actually, I was thinking of world peace, right, given the geopolitical tensions and all that. But honestly, I think, yeah, we do have a lot of existential crisis going on, notwithstanding, climate change and all that. So I do wish all the countries will really work together to fulfill the commitments, right, to the Paris Treaty Climate Change Act.
Beautiful one, thanks. Hakon.
I echo that definitely. And if I were to use the magic wand on what I'm doing, it's probably, I think, from a technology development in general in the maritime space, is that everybody get the same mindset shift and understanding, so we as an ecosystem can work together to make things happen much faster than today.
Amen to that.
I have to agree with Hakon here, actually. I think the important part, at least in my industry, is to get everybody working together, both our customers plus regulators that actually regulate the operations that we're doing, as well as other partners or people in the similar industry, whether it's logistics, surveillance, etc., to be working together to explore new innovative ideas like this.
Thank you very much. It was not so easy to do a 360 on this one, but you have done the impossible. So warm thanks and congratulations for answering difficult questions. And I would like to close with 2 quotes of some of my favorite people, that's relating to what we have discussed. Thomas Edison: "Vision without execution is merely hallucination." I like that. Then Nelson Mandela said, "Many things seem impossible until you have done them." And in that true sense, let's keep up the good work and never stop dreaming. Thank you, everybody.